It was 11:42 p.m. in Paris. Center court at Roland Garros was almost empty. The lights still burned overhead, but most of the cameras had already cut. Except one. One camera caught Novak Djokovic walking to the changeover bench, sitting down, and pulling a white towel over his head. He didn't move for 90 seconds. No water, no coach, no towel whip, no racket inspection, just stillness. The kind that doesn't belong to a man who has spent 20 years refusing to be still. The kind that doesn't belong to the greatest closer the sport has ever produced. Months later, sitting in front of a microphone in a quiet press room in New York, he would finally say it out loud, and the words would rewrite the way we understand the final chapter of his career. This is the story of the one player who made Novak Djokovic feel helpless, and how, after 20 years of refusing to admit it about anyone, he finally said it himself. You probably know his name, but you have never heard it framed like this. He is 24 years old. He grew up in a small town in northern Italy, closer to the Austrian border than to Rome. He started in competitive skiing before he ever picked up a racket. He is quiet in interviews. He does not break rackets. He does not scream at umpires. He does not pump his fist after winners. He just hits the ball, walks back to the baseline, and hits it again. His name is Jannik Sinner, and between January 2024 and the end of 2025, he beat Novak Djokovic 5 times in a row. 5 wins alone doesn't sound like much. Plenty of players have beaten Djokovic 5 times across a full career, but nobody has ever beaten him 5 consecutive times while Djokovic was still fully committed to winning Grand Slams. Not Federer, not Nadal, not Murray, not Wawrinka in his miracle year. Nobody. 2 of those 5 wins came in Grand Slam semifinals, in straight sets, back-to-back, at Roland Garros and at Wimbledon, on clay. Then on grass. 2 completely different surfaces, against a man who had won 24 major titles on every kind of court the sport plays on. To understand what that bench in Paris really meant, you have to go back to where this story actually starts. Rewind to 2021. Davis Cup, Madrid. Sinner was 19 years old, a red-haired teenager just inside the world's top 20, with a flat forehand and an even flatter expression. Djokovic was 34, world number 1. The most mentally feared player on the planet. The match lasted barely 2 hours. Djokovic won in straight sets. He didn't lose serve once. After the handshake, he smiled, said a few warm words to Sinner at the net, and walked off the court like a man who had just finished a light practice session. That set the pattern. Through 2022 and into 2023, every time they crossed paths, Djokovic won. He beat Sinner at Monte Carlo. He beat him at Wimbledon. He beat him at the ATP Finals. He didn't just beat him, he solved him. He read the second serve. He neutralized the forehand. He stretched rallies until the Italian's legs slowed and the errors started to bleed. In late 2023, Djokovic talked about the younger generation with the quiet confidence of a professor discussing a promising student. The student was good. The student was hungry. The student was the future. But the master was still the master. Then the calendar turned to 2024, and everything the tennis world thought it understood about this matchup broke in half. The first crack came at the Australian Open. Semifinal. Djokovic was the defending champion. He had won that title 10 times. He had a 33-match unbeaten streak at Melbourne Park. The court was, by any reasonable measure, his second home. Sinner beat him in 4 sets. In Melbourne, on the hard court, Djokovic owned against the player who had turned that surface into a cathedral. And here is the strange part, the part the analysts struggled to put into words. It wasn't that Sinner played a perfect match. It was that Sinner played a normal match. For him. No fireworks. No magic shots. Just one heavy ball after another, landing on the same square foot of the baseline, again and again, until Djokovic ran out of answers. After the match, Djokovic was diplomatic. He praised the Italian. He talked about adjustments. He flew home. Most of the tennis world filed it away. One match. One bad day. Djokovic would correct course. He always corrected course. That is what he does. That is what he has always done. He didn't correct. What nobody understood yet, what nobody could understand yet, was that Melbourne wasn't the start of a slump. It was the start of a pattern. Sinner had found something inside Djokovic's game that no other player on tour had found, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Fast forward to the summer of 2025, Roland Garros, semifinal, then Wimbledon, semifinal. 5 weeks apart on 2 different surfaces in 2 of the 4 biggest matches the sport offers, Sinner won both, in straight sets. On grass at Wimbledon, the detail that stays with you is not the scoreline. It is the 3rd set. Watch Djokovic in the 3rd set. The forehand, normally a precision instrument, starts landing short. The serve, normally a weapon when his back is against the wall, starts landing in the middle of the box. He is still moving. He is still fighting. But the belief, the thing that carried him through hundreds of impossible moments across 20 years, is not there. For the first time in memory, Djokovic looks like a man playing not to win, but to survive the next point. He doesn't survive it. After the match, the press conference was short. Djokovic gave the right answers, the polished ones. He praised Sinner. He praised the crowd. He said nothing about what was really happening inside the match or inside his head. That would come later. By the time the U.S. Open arrived in September 2025, the tennis world was watching Djokovic differently. Not with pity. Djokovic doesn't accept pity, but with the specific kind of attention you give a heavyweight champion in the late rounds of his career when you are trying to gauge whether the next punch he takes is the one that ends him. He made the semifinal. Of course he did. He always makes the semifinal. Reaching the Final Four of all 4 Grand Slams in 2025 was something only one other man on the planet accomplished, and that man was Sinner. But in New York, he ran into Carlos Alcaraz, Sinner's only true rival, the other half of the new duopoly that had begun to consume the men's game. Alcaraz beat him in straight sets, 3 losses, 3 consecutive Grand Slam semifinals, the same 2 players. And in that press room, after the Alcaraz loss, Djokovic finally said something he had spent 20 years refusing to say about anybody. He said the reality of getting older had hit him over the last year and a half like never before. He said he was reaching the semifinals of every slam and then walking into matches against Sinner or Alcaraz with the tank half empty. He said his level of tennis was still there. The physicality was the problem, the recovery, the body, the thing no mental strength in the world can override indefinitely. And then he said the line that traveled around the tennis world within the hour. They're just too good, playing on a really high level. For most athletes, that is a casual concession, a polite thing to say after a loss. For Djokovic, the man who built his entire identity on the belief that he could outwork, outthink, and outlast any human being across the net, that was something else. That was an admission, the kind he had refused to give about Federer in his prime, the kind he had refused to give about Nadal on clay, the kind he had refused to give about himself, even on his worst days. He was telling the world, in the most measured language he could find, that there was finally a wall he could not climb. Now go back to that bench in Paris, back to the white towel and the 90 seconds of stillness. We know now what he was sitting with. Not a strategy, not a prayer. He was sitting with the same private knowledge he would publicly confess 3 months later in New York, that the game he had mastered for 2 decades was now being played at the highest level by someone he could no longer reach. This is what makes the Sinner matchup different from every other rivalry in Djokovic's career. Federer was a genius, but a genius Djokovic learned to absorb. He turned Federer's elegance into a tactical problem and solved it. Nadal was a force of nature, but a force Djokovic spent years studying until he could neutralize it on his best days. But Sinner is something else. Sinner is the matchup Djokovic himself trained the next generation to become: heavy from the baseline, equal off both wings, patient, surgical, built for 5-set attrition. And here is the cruel symmetry. Sinner does the one thing Djokovic always did best. And he does it without 20 years of mileage in his legs, without the surgeries, without the accumulated weight of a career spent running down every ball on every surface for 2 decades. That is why the word helpless is the right word. Not outplayed, not beaten. Helpless, because helplessness is what happens when you understand exactly what the other player is doing, exactly how to counter it in theory, and your body simply cannot produce the answer anymore. His mind has not aged. His body has. And Sinner is the player who exposed the gap between them. Here is where most rivalry stories end. With the admission, with the passing of the torch, with the slow fade to black. This one doesn't. In January 2026 at the Australian Open semifinal, Djokovic walked onto Rod Laver Arena and beat Jannik Sinner in 5 sets, ending the losing streak, rewriting the narrative, at least for one night. For one night, the old king reminded everyone why he is the old king. But Sinner is 24, Alcaraz is 22, Djokovic is 38. The math is not kind, the calendar is not kind, and the bodies on the other side of the net are not kind. In Melbourne, Djokovic told reporters he wasn't chasing anyone, that he was creating his own history, that Federer and Nadal would always be his greatest rivals, not Sinner, not Alcaraz, that the natural cycle of sport is for the king to eventually step aside and cheer for the next wave coming underneath. He said all the right things, the legacy things, the composed things, but somewhere in the back of his mind, you have to wonder if he still hears that bench in Paris. The 90 seconds under the towel. The stillness that didn't belong to him, because the next match between Djokovic and Sinner is already on the calendar, and then the next one after that, and the one after that. And every time they walk onto a court together, the same question walks in with them. Was the admission the end of something, or the beginning of the most defiant final act this sport has ever seen? The cameras are already setting up. The towel is folded on the bench. We'll find out.